Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here to talk about some more Elden Ring. This is about 300 hours or so later, which means I have about 300 hours of gameplay into the game, which is actually not that much when you take into consideration the amount of time I usually play in these games. By the way, the gameplay portion is mostly going to be very early in the game, so I don't really think there's going to be big spoilers here. But yeah, the reason why I've been so slow with this is because obviously recording, editing the first playthrough, that took a significant chunk of time, balancing that together with family time and all that stuff. And then immediately after that, I did a second playthrough because I wanted to do all of the quest lines and all of that stuff before I'd put out another opinion video talking about Elden Ring, right? And that also took a significant chunk of time. Future plans, by the way, most likely will be streaming New Game Plus build. I'm already thinking about what that build is going to be. I talked about it in the previous Elden Ring video. And that particular playthrough most likely will not include spirit summons because I already did a playthrough using spirit summons. But it will most likely feature a busted build. Now, this is not a build that I've looked up online or anything. It's just a build that I think is going to be really powerful. We shall see if that is the case or not. Maybe it won't be as powerful as I think. And it's also not going to be the gun shield build. So just letting guys know that that is probably going to be a thing. New Game Plus playthrough. I'll also not be doing like all of the content again because that would be the third time in a very short time span that I've been doing that. And that would probably burn me the crap out. I'll probably be doing mostly just like legacy dungeons and farting around and whatnot, and couple of collection things that I still need to do because I have almost all of the trophies on PlayStation. I'm going to be doing that ending that I still haven't done, the one that you got to get naked for, because those are things I haven't seen yet. Now, my thoughts on Elden Ring, now that I've spent over 300 hours talking, not talking, now that I've spent over 300 hours playing the game, I have a much more knowledge of the game than I initially had. So initially I had like, my early impressions. I was thinking, oh, game looks really good. I like the gameplay. Feels fine. Let's go. Now that I've actually played through it twice, done all of the bosses, done all the optional things with the exception of, like I said, one of the endings, my opinion is much more solidified. And one of the things that has definitely remained a constant throughout this whole thing is just how complete Elden Ring feels. Elden Ring is hands down a masterpiece, and I've seen a lot of people come out of the woodwork saying, oh, it's not a masterpiece, it's not a 10 out of 10, and blah, 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 blah. This is one of the reasons why I don't like scores. I've talked about it over and over. I do not like scoring games because I think it's too diminutive. It does not respect the art form of video games. It's like, oh, this game's an 8, this game's a 7, this game's a 10, whatever. Who gives a fuck? What matters is the person that is playing the game. How adequate is the game for you? And people are going to have different opinions. For me, this game is freaking fantastic. It is not a perfect game. There are a couple of flaws that I will point out throughout this video. Flaws for me, which again might not be the same for everybody that has played the game before. So we shall see how that works out for people. But I definitely feel like in terms of completion, this is one of the most complete games that we've had in the last 10 years or so. And I realize that there have been problems on release, particularly with the PC version. As someone who played the PC version extensively as my first experience, I can definitely confirm that there's like some issues with frame rate, because particularly it seems like it's even an issue that is less felt in machines that are maybe not as cutting edge, because I definitely felt really bad frame rate on my 6900 XT in certain occasions, not always, which was kind of weird because I then had people that were going like, oh, I didn't really notice it all that much, right? So that was just like a weird thing overall, that on weaker hardware, the problem was not as deeply felt. It just feels like they could have done a little bit more work with the optimization. Then on top of it, there were also a couple of more issues in terms of like some quest lines were not complete. There's still certain quest lines that players have been theorizing, because now that I've done all of the quest lines that are in the game, at least all of them that I'm aware of, even though there were a couple of steps that I did that, I could have possibly seen like a little bit more of certain quest lines, because you guys know how steps work in Souls games, right? And with their quest lines and whatnot. But there are still players theorizing like a certain lady that dresses in white in a house near lava. Some people are saying that particular quest line isn't finished yet, so who knows if they're adding more stuff to that quest line or not, particularly because of the way in which that quest line ends, which is interesting. But yeah, not just that. There are other quest lines that people are theorizing that could potentially see some more development. But you see, that is again one of the things that really made me wish that they had delayed the game a little bit more. And I understand that a lot of people is like, why you want to delay? No more delays. Release it now. Give it to us now. I've always been more of an adequate. Delay it as much as it needs to be delayed. Release it when you feel like it's ready, and just be done with it, right? That's the way that I feel about it. Now, having said that, even though there are these imperfections with performance issues from quest lines that were not complete and were added later, I still think that the game is a masterpiece, despite all that. And again, for some people, they're going to be like, oh, no, it's bad because this, bad because that. Everybody's going to have opinions. What I do disagree with is definitely those two idiot creators that have been going around, and this is the only name for these people. Like, I'm not even going to try to be diplomatic about this. This Quantum TV and Acerthorn idiots, these people are completely and utterly ridiculous, not to mention abusing the YouTube copyright takedown system illegally to silence criticism of them due to the fact that they've made reviews of Elden Ring where they've played the game for like an hour and consider that the game is trash, not even once considering that maybe the game is just not for you. Like, look, I know that I don't care that much for strategy games with very few exceptions. So guess what? I don't tend to play a lot of strategy games. I know that I don't care that much for shooter games. So guess what? I don't tend to play a lot of shooter games. You just got to recognize when a game is and is not for you. And just because the game is third person and it is an open world doesn't mean that you're going to like it. And it's just that simple. I feel like very few games give you the same sense of adventure that Elden Ring does, which not only it feels like an incredibly complete game, one of the most complete games that we've seen in the last decade, it also gives you a fantastic sense of adventure. And on top of it, like most of the things surrounding it, like the challenge level, the combat, the visuals, the sound, as far as I'm concerned, it's friggin' fantastic. And some people are also quick to point out, oh, God of War looks better. Yes, sure, fine, whatever, depending on your own personal taste, because not for everyone God of War is not going to look better. I think that God of War has more graphical fidelity, but that does not necessarily make it look better. You know, because I'm someone who appreciates art style a lot more than anything else, and I think the art style in this is fantastic. But then again, I'm not really going to be comparing those two games all that much because I feel like each of these games serves a different niche to begin with, and you know, so now in terms of zones, most of the zones I greatly enjoyed. There were a couple of zones that I didn't like as much. There's a zone that gave me a little bit of Frigid Outskirts vibes, and as you guys know, I never really liked Frigid Outskirts, but it was like a very minor thing, so it didn't really bother me that much. That zone was a little bit annoying, but here's the thing. Whenever there's a zone in this game that I don't really gel with all that much, maybe because of the type of enemies that are in that zone, maybe because of the way that the zone looks, maybe because of the things that you have to do in order to navigate the zone, or in this specific case, because just like tons and tons and tons of fog and snow and stuff, and I was just like, I can't see a damn thing in front of me. And I get it, that's the design of that zone, but I still don't like it. But the thing about it, when it comes to Elden Ring, is that Torrent actually makes a lot of these zones a lot more bearable, because you can just like, you get on your horse and you start running around and you just do what you got to do. You go to the places that you got to go to, you explore as much or as little as you want to, and you always have Torrent to kind of like, you know, speed through the zone a little bit more efficiently, whereas in the Frigid Outskirts, you basically had unicorns going through your anus, and there was very little that you could actually do about that. It's like, yeah, go ahead, go kill these unicorns. There's like 50 of them spread throughout the whole zone. They're invisible, and they'll keep attacking you nonstop. That was not that great. Now, in terms of boss fights, I think that most of them are pretty good. I think overall, very positive experience when it came to boss fights. Now, I know that for a lot of people, they're not going to gel with some of them. I myself didn't really care for a couple of them, but that I felt like was more due to personal taste than necessarily like a fault with the bosses. Like, obviously, if you talk about the hardest boss in the game, I'm not going to say her name just in case some people, are not there yet, and I'm trying to keep things as spoiler-free as possible. But you guys know who I'm talking about, one of the hardest bosses in the game, right? I know that a lot of people are not going to like that boss, and I myself didn't really care too much for it, but I can respect that for a lot of people, they probably love that boss fight. As a matter of fact, I've heard as much from you guys in the comment section and people telling me on social media and stuff that a lot of people really, really, really enjoyed that boss fight. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. I can see why. It's just not for me in a way because the playstyle that I was doing felt very underwhelming against her. This also has to do with strength builds, which we'll touch up on in a bit. But, so boss fights, zone, dungeons, map design, loved every bit of it. Really good stuff. Combat overall also felt friggin' fantastic. There's so much variety with what you can do in builds in this game that it completely just blows my mind. It's insanity. Like, I can't even imagine the amount of crazy builds that people have come up with, considering the stuff that I've thought of and the stuff that I've done in the game in my experimentation so far, and the build that I'm planning to do on New Game Plus. And a great part of this is obviously because of Ashes of War, which I've said it since the beginning. If you go back to the first videos that I did, when I talked about Ashes of War after having played the closed network test and all of that stuff, I was like, dude, Ashes of War is potentially one of the best features in this game. I still retain that. Like, Ashes of War is friggin' fantastic. Like, I don't think that anybody is really going to contest that. I mean, the simple fact that you can change the scaling on your weapon like that on a site of grace, which is essentially a bonfire, for those of you that haven't really played Elden Ring yet, is a fantastic feature, and it feels great because you can just like constantly be adapting and changing your strategy depending on what a boss is doing. Say, for instance, you have a weapon that is a fire weapon and you're fighting a boss that is a fire boss. You can just go to the site of grace and change the Ash of War of your fire-based weapon into a different Ash of War, assuming that your weapon supports this, because obviously some weapons have unique Ashes of War. In that case, you might want to consider a different weapon, right? But Spirit Ashes, that's another thing. Spirit Ashes, the summons that you got, I think that's a really cool feature to the game as well. I know that there's a lot of people that are divided on this. There's a lot of people that go like, if you completed the game using Spirit Ashes, you're not a real Souls player. It's like, ignore these people. Here's the way that you got to think about it. If you completed the game having fun, hopefully not cheating, because if you cheated, I mean, come on, man, don't cheat. Like, these games are so much fun that cheating, you really are just kind of like ruining the game for yourself. That's my opinion on that. But like, if you complete the game using Spirit Ashes, I think it's as valid. It's as valid of a completion as not using them. It's completely up to each player. As a matter of fact, in certain bosses, I actually thought, because I've done the game mostly without Spirit Ashes now, which was the first playthrough. In the second playthrough, it was actually the other way around. I was mostly using Spirit Ashes because I was just farting around and experimenting with stuff and doing completionism stuff. So I didn't want it to spend too much time bashing my face against bosses that I had already beaten. But I actually think that in some bosses, the Spirit Ashes are a hindrance, because it makes the boss harder to read depending on whether it's attacking you or completed, or if it's attacking your summon, right? So I don't really spend too much time thinking about that stuff. So I think Spirit Ashes are really cool, and it makes the game more approachable for more people. And to me, as far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing. And now people are going to bring up, well, why isn't an easy mode a good thing? And it's like, I don't want to get into that discussion. I still retain my opinion that an easy mode would absolutely ruin this game. Like, straight up, that is my opinion on it. That is never going to change. And I'm yet to see literally one good argument as to how an easy mode would bring anything good to this game, or how it would prevent the game from basically being ruined by people, particularly with its communal experience. Because, like, a big part of this game is the experience of the community and interacting with members of the community, which I realize that a lot of people consider to be toxic, but maybe you shouldn't spend every day just going out and saying, oh, Souls players are so toxic, and then you'll be surprised when you go online and turns out they might be toxic towards you because you've been spending like ages and ages calling them toxic and telling them how bad they are and all of these other things, right? I think the Souls community is actually fantastic, and there's already been examples of people helping each other out with some of the tougher bosses in the game. Like some of you guys may know the story of Let Me Solo Her and stuff like that. There's already been plenty of stories coming out like that, which just shows you that this community is actually wholesome. Yes, there are some elitist jerks in the community as well, just like there's elitist jerks in any community, but it is what it is. You have to take the good with the bad and not generalize an entire community based on your interaction with one or two people, maybe. Now, as I've said, I've done most of the quest lines, which now gives me an opportunity to talk about that, particularly in terms of people talking about additional guidance in the game and whatnot. I think that what the developers did was it was an okay step. I don't think it was super necessary. I think it would have been more interesting if you gave the players tools to track these things. I still think that having an actual notepad built into the game that you could put pins in the map and then take notes on those pins that you could then click and say, oh, I met this NPC here. I met this NPC there. You could use something similar to the messaging system that is already built in game for you to leave messages for other players so that you wouldn't have to type it out all the time for, controller players that are not playing on PC because they're not going to have easy access to a keyboard, which would make it harder to take notes. But it would make it easier if you would be able to mark those points yourself and be, for instance, oh, I found a boss here, so you'd put that there. And you can put some markings in there, but there's no room for leaving notes, which would be useful. Something that was suggested by some people, and that I actually think would be a really good addition to the game, would be if you could have a conversation log of the conversations that you had with NPCs. Now that, I think, would be really interesting. You could just have a directory, for instance, where it would have a model of the NPC and the dialogues that you've had with this NPC up until this point. That, I think, would be cool. None of this quest tracking or anything of the sorts on your screen. That, I think, would actually be completely terrible, but that's just one man's opinion. And one of the things about these quest lines is that, as a lot of people pointed out, it's pretty hard to figure out all of the quest lines. Now, I did my playthrough where I went in completely blind and did everything blind. So for my second run, I actually went ahead and whenever I felt like I was stuck on a particular quest line, I checked to see what the next step would be. I would always check only the next step so that I could then try and figure out the rest of the quest for myself. And that's pretty much how I did most of the quest lines. So that allowed me to have the one playthrough where I went in completely blind and experienced discovery and all of that, and then the second playthrough where I had the more completionism side of things. And I have to say, personally, I'm really happy with the way that they do these quests. Now, there are some of them that are a little bit obscure and could maybe do with a little bit more guidance, but when I'm talking about guidance, I'm talking about NPCs actually telling you things, which would then could be compounded by the system that I'm talking about, having NPCs and their dialogues, like a directory of NPCs and dialogues, and just having the NPCs give you a couple of more hints as to some of the things that could be happening, I think would be a good thing. Now, bear in mind, like I said, this is NPCs giving you hints. I'm not talking about an arrow pointing you towards your destination, a GPS marker, anything of the sorts, a quest tracker, none of that. I think that has absolutely no place in a game like this. And one of the things that I really appreciated while I was playing through Elden Ring is actually just how clean the UI is, how everything is completely clean. They just let you focus on the action, and whenever you need to look at additional information, you can toggle certain UI elements on or off. I think that was fantastic. I think that the way that they did it is good. I think that the map is good. And I want people to keep something in mind when they complain about the lack of guidance in the quest, is that very much like all of the Souls games, these quests are designed as communal experiences. These are things that people figure out as they play the game more and more. Now, with Elden Ring, though, there is a little bit of a problem there. And that is that if you think about replaying something like a Dark Souls, it's a much smaller time investment than replaying something like an Elden Ring. Because Elden Ring, in terms of scope, is just a much bigger game. And now you guys are going to be like, so you're complaining about the length of the game? There's too much game there? No. What I'm saying is it makes it harder for, for these quests to be discovered in a smaller community. Say, for instance, you have a group of 5 friends or something like that, and all of you are playing Elden Ring. It's a fantastic experience because you can be constantly exchanging information with your friends and be going, oh, did you guys find this thing on this place yet? Oh, no, I haven't, but I found this other thing. And people start collating all this information together, and that is how I feel that these quest lines are designed to be experienced. You just have multiple people that are discussing this amongst themselves and then collating the information, figuring out, okay, so if I go here, I find the character there. If I go there, find the character here. Part of it, I discovered this by myself on the second time that I went through, because I would realize, okay, I've seen this NPC here before, but now I see him over here. That implicates that this NPC has done X, Y, or Z. And it's about the joy of discovering this stuff for yourself. Now, I know that some people just went on to Fextra Life and figured, the quests out that way because they don't have time to play the game. And it's like, I don't want to get into that discussion. I made a video talking about that, and I sympathize if that's the way you want to play the game. Play the game like that. My recommendation is first playthrough, you should do it blind. But again, it's a recommendation. I'm not demanding that you play like I'm telling you to. Play however you want, so long as it's fun for you, right? But I just want people to keep that in mind, that is the design behind the quest line experiences of Elden Ring. It is that it's a communal experience. So it's not designed for you to, in a single run, discover everything by yourself. It's designed for you to ask other people and talk about it. The whole game is designed around people having conversations, which is why, I did the show with Fighting Cowboy, and during the closed network test, I did the show with Eric's and the show with Beef Beaverson, and I thought that those were good conversations. So that's kind of like the way the game is designed to be experienced, in my opinion. Now, I want to talk about my biggest complaint. Literally, my biggest complaint in this game is the camera. I really do feel, and I know that Fighting Cowboy said this must be a you thing, but it's like, after having played it on PC and having played it on PlayStation 5, I do feel like the camera is the biggest hindrance. I feel like it is actually worse than previous Souls games. The camera felt more responsive. The turning of the camera felt more natural. I can't explain it to you, but playing a previous Souls game and playing Elden Ring, I definitely feel some camera things. And on top of it, another reason why I like to bring up the camera is because I feel that this is one of the areas that From Software really needs to improve if they want to iterate on future Souls-like games and whatnot, because who knows what From Software is doing next, right? But this would be the biggest possible upgrade to the feel of the game, is the way that camera works. Because you can go ahead and say, oh yeah, but the game is designed for you to remove lock-on when you're fighting big monsters and put lock-on back on when you're fighting smaller monsters. And whenever people feel the need to tell me that, I just stand there in awe, and I'm just thinking, so you think that Elden Ring is my first rodeo with From Software? That's clearly what you think. What I'm saying is that the system is not ideal. The whole lock-on, lock-off system, I don't think is necessarily a particularly fun experience, and it is awkward at best and really bad in certain specific situations. How many times have you been in a situation where you're trying to lock on to an enemy and it's just outside of that lock-on range, and therefore your camera's you're just shifting camera as you're trying to lock onto this enemy, and there's other enemies attacking and you're trying to shift stuff around. It's not super good. It's not terrible, like it works, but it's not super good. Another thing about the camera that I think, again, is something that could greatly improve the feeling of the game is, say for instance, you're fighting a big dragon. If you're fighting a big dragon Big dragon takes up the whole screen when you're close enough to hit it with your weapon. It takes up the whole screen. Why can we not have a dynamic zoom out for those moments? And, you know, Fighting Cowboy had brought up the argument with me when we were having this conversation about how, well, for certain bosses, like you guys know Bubbly Boy with horns. You guys know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to say any more than that. Those of you who've played it. Bubbly Boy with horns likes to play with purple spells. That boss, he was saying, well, this boss teleports, right? So the whole thing is you don't want to have too much of a zoom out, or it takes away the challenge of the boss teleporting away and you already know where he is. And I think that situations like that is the reason why I think that the camera should be dynamic. So in situations like that, the camera won't automatically zoom out so that you can see where the boss spawned. The camera resumes normal function so that you can locate the boss. And then when you locate the boss and you approach yourself enough, it can go back to being more dynamic, more zoomed out. Because, you know, the whole thing about attacking a big enemy in the foot, it gets a little bit old, right? And this is one of the reasons why I personally really love the combat in something like a Monster Hunter World, is because you have a little bit more freedom as to where you are attacking these big monsters. And the monsters themselves are designed in a way that complement that freedom. And in this game, you have more freedom than you've had before, because if you predict the movements appropriately of, say, a dragon boss, you can snipe the head and you can do all of these mechanics. You can bait certain patterns in order to achieve more advantageous attack patterns for yourself. A fantastic example of this was the community player who did that hardest boss that I talked about earlier at rune level 1 without dodging, without projectiles, without anything. Just rune level 1, naked, and just really going for the fundamentals of baiting certain attacks, you know, positioning himself appropriately, not dodging. Again, I was saying dodging, not even dodging, just like running away when he needed to and counterattacking, so on and so forth, right? But at the end of the day, I feel like improvements to the camera could make the whole experience much more satisfying to engage in terms of when you're fighting a big boss. I'm not talking about full-on zoom out. I'm talking about something that makes the action feel better than me slashing at a dragon's foot. That's what I'm saying, because the dragon's taken up the whole... Another good example of this would be when I fought that secret dragon that's in one of the later levels. I posted that on the channel as well. If you look at that fight, I barely get a good look at the dragon itself. Why? Because I'm just destroying this dragon by slashing at its chest. So I barely even get to look at its heads. I can see which head is doing what and what's going to happen, but they're not actually on screen. They're like on the edges of the screen, and I can tell, okay, by what I'm seeing at the edge of the screen, he's going to do this. But I'm not actually seeing the dragon's attacks. No amount of practical zooming out can make the chest, face, Mac, fire belcher fit on screen without making it unplayable by vanishing your characters. In some cases, the scale is simply too big. I think that there's a happy medium we can have there where you don't need to be with a camera like this. I think there's a happy medium to be achieved where you can maybe just zoom out a little bit. It doesn't have to show you the whole monster. The idea is just to have a more epic camera angle while you're doing the fight. And I'm not talking about Hollywood. I'm not talking about changing the combat to QTEs or anything like that. Everything remains the same. The camera just shifts ever so slightly, a little bit of a zoom out, not a massive zoom out, but just a little bit more dynamic action from the camera to give you a better... to make it, in a way, even make it easier for you to fight this creature, to be able to read it better because you're not just looking at a foot. That's the point that I'm trying to make with that, right? That's my biggest complaint. Then a couple of other things that I would bring up is when I played strength builds, which was during the first blind playthrough, it felt extremely undertuned, especially after my second playthrough where I played with Frost, which was completely disgusting, where my stat investment was nothing. I did not invest any stats, and my weapon would just decimate bosses with complete disregard. Whereas if you're talking about my strength build where I invested 66 points into strength or something like that, and it felt, by comparison with my Ice Spear build, it felt completely underpowered. It felt like I was hitting enemies with a wet piece of paper. Whereas with the Ice Spear, it felt like I was hitting them with a nuclear bomb. So, you know, another thing that I felt was a little bit weird was the upgrade system, because of the fact that you can upgrade maybe 20 or so somber weapons with the stuff that you pick up without actually buying additional stones using the bell bearings and all that stuff. Whereas you can maybe upgrade, I don't know, 3 or 4 of the regular ones with the materials that you upgrade because of the requirements. When comparing those two, that felt weird. I don't know exactly why they did it like that. Maybe they wanted somber weapons to be more used than regular weapons, but it definitely felt very weird. Also, I rarely engaged with crafting, but I was glad it was there. It's an additional system for you to play around with if you really care about it. It was very good for me to make the guiding stones, the prism stones. I think that's the most that I used the crafting system for. Maybe that's why strength felt so underpowered now that I think about it, but yeah. Make monsters smaller? No, I don't think that's the way to do it. But ultimately, 300 hours later, I still think that the game is an absolute masterpiece, and I completely disagree with people who are saying that the game's not good, or the game's too hard, or the game's this, or the game's that. I 1000% disagree. I just think that a lot of the people that think the game's too hard is because they haven't bothered learning the game more than anything else. And most of the people that are just crapping on the game, either the game is not for them or, you know, whatever. But I think the game is definitely good. That's the way I feel about it. The community is sleeping on consumables this time, especially perfumes. I think so too, that buffoon. I definitely think so too. I think I'm sleeping on those consumables as well. But I also feel that new players are probably using those consumables more than veterans, maybe? Because I feel that the games before this one trained me to play it like that, to just be used to have, okay, I got my Estus flasks, go. I don't have to rely on anything else. My Estus flasks, go. Previous games had consumables too, and I rarely use them there. Most games that have consumables, I rarely use them. You know, I'm always saving them because I might need them later. Here's a good example. On my second playthrough, I don't think I used rune arcs at all. I might have used the rune arc once, maybe. I did not use them at all. I had like 40 of them. And I was just thinking to myself, hey, I might need those rune arcs later. I might need them later. And then I finished the game. Turns out I didn't need them later. I might have needed them earlier. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Ned the Ninja. I feel like crafting is a really good system. I just felt that I didn't engage with it nearly as much as I should have. But, yeah, those are my thoughts on Elden Ring. I wanted to put out a video talking about that. So, yeah, that's that. And for those of you watching this on YouTube, feel free to leave me any further questions that you have to ask me about Elden Ring. If I see enough questions, I might do a video answering people questions and stuff like that. But, yeah, for now, that's going to be it.